In terms of just key dates for the next year that we know about, 27th of May is Queen's speech, where the Queen will announce the government's legislative programme. We think the 8th of July is the emergency budget, where the Chancellor will announce details about 12 billion, but also will start to announce details about other spending reductions. And then all we know is that there is going to be a comprehensive spending review over the summer. We don't know when that will be announced, but I think it's fair to assume that there will be an autumn statement, probably in November time. So, what should we expect in the sector? I'm finishing up if you've had enough. Well, we spent much of the last couple of years, I think it is fair to say, in a pretty big fight with the government about what you probably all know as the Lobbying Act, or to give it its full name, the Transparency of Lobbying, Non-Party Campaigning and Trade Union Administration Act. Okay? I think it is pretty clear that this is not going to be removed from the statute books going forward. Okay? So I think the best that the sector can hope for going forward is to instead make an argument about the burdensome sort of regulatory load that this places upon organisations. So we have a review by Lord Hodgson that's currently underway. If you think that this is important and affects your organisation, I encourage you to try and engage with that. What we will also see in the coming months is that I think the Charity Commission will almost certainly look at its own rules around campaigning by charities, the so-called CC9 guidance, and see how that worked in the election. Quite interestingly, from what we can see, I suspect that potentially most of the breaches of CC9 during the last election were charities supporting the Conservative Party. But that's for a discussion over a drink, I suspect. Either way, I think we will see a continuation of that sense of what are charities for, what's the voluntary sector for, and I think the answer to that from the current administration will largely centre around delivering services. It won't be about voice and campaigning. The second thing that I think we're going to have to get to grips with over this coming Parliament is public perception that some charities are not good, that they are not there for the common benefit, that they are there for private gain. And I think we saw this over the last couple of days with a fundraising story about Olive Cook. So my argument to you is that tactically as a sector, how do we head off the potential risk of further regulation? Okay, because I think there will be a mindset to potentially regulate around campaigning, to potentially regulate around fundraising. They have the legislation on the books, for example, around fundraising. And my argument is that we have to take the lead as the sector in terms of setting our own standards. Thirdly, in terms of what the government's interested in and the agenda that it wants to push forward, I would argue that social investment is one of the big opportunities. But again, I think we have to define what we want from social investment and what we mean by social investment. I would argue to you it's not just about social impact bonds. It's about quite different forms of social investment. And quite obviously, simple loan finance is something that all parties, I think, are increasingly talking about. But also social investments at the community level, so community shares type schemes. I think there will be more interest in that in government. The Conservative Manifesto talks about unleashing the power of more charities and voluntary organisations using payment by results. So in terms of that agenda that's around public services, there are potentially some opportunities around payment by results, but I would also set a challenge down for us as a sector of how do we influence the government on its payment by results agenda and show them what works, but also what doesn't work. Because we get many members telling us that PBR does not work for them. What's also in the Conservative Manifesto is a promise that this will be the most transparent government ever. And we will not be immune from that transparency agenda. So again, I think if we don't define that agenda from our perspective, we will find that it will be defined for us. The government is also putting much more faith in IT as a way of delivering services. If you read the Financial Times yesterday, you had permanent secretaries quoted as saying that they got sort of caught unawares of just how important digital was in terms of transforming public services. I think as a sector, again, we will have to be ready for that. The slide there, that's a slide from gov.uk. So if any of you have bought a tax disc at all in the last year, you probably did it through gov.uk. In 2014, 137,000 people used gov.uk, not from their computer, but from their PlayStation or their Xbox. Government has really pivoted on the digital agenda, and I think we have to engage with that going forward. And then finally, and almost finally from me, volunteering. When you come back to the government's perception of what's the sector for, what is it, I think their main interest is in social action. It's in smaller community groups. They're much less interested in big charities from what I can see. And I think they're especially interested in volunteering in public services. So is there something there that we can do? And then I want to finish on this public trust issue. What we saw in the last Parliament is that you had MPs like Priti Patel who made an issue, in her case, of CEO salaries. Okay? And I think we've seen over the last couple of days, there is a bit of a mood out there that an ambitious parliamentarian could tap into if they wanted to make mischief in relation to our sector. Okay? So I think one of the real challenges that we've got to do is just help parliamentarians really understand what modern charities are about, how volunteering works and so on, or else I think there's a risk that in the coming 5 years the narrative is going to get taken away from us.
Thank you, Karl. I hope that raises a range of questions and prompts you into asking really difficult questions. I would like to see Karl respond to difficult questions. But can I open it up to the floor if you'd like to raise some of the conundrums that possibly face the sector in the next 5 years?
Can I? Hilary Sears and I share two charities with very different backgrounds. One is publicly funded, if you like, 90%, but the MS Society, the other one, is very much based on voluntary. And one of the things that we are between four walls, struggling with is volunteering. So